Friends, hello, welcome back to the Devy Dose. As always, I am your host, EK at EK Baller. Today we have an awesome extra special guest for you, uh, my friend and former league mate, Travis Maye of Rotoviz and A to Z Sports. Travis, how you doing, man?
Doing great. Glad to be here and joining you talking about some of the top quarterbacks in the 2024 NFL draft class. Always happy to talk some prospects for sure.
Yeah, man. I know we interact on Twitter plenty about this stuff, and I definitely value your opinions. There's a reason I asked you to be on here. I think you're established yourself well as a level-headed assessor of talent, and I think this class needs that because there's been a lot of superlatives and hyperbole thrown around, and I'm not sure where to start sorting through it. So I think we'll get to that together.
It's that time of year. It's that time of year. I mean, like it's free agency news is like going like crazy. We're fresh off the combine, but like truly new draft information other than like just pro day stuff with some inflated agility times and 40 times. Like
Right.
we're thirsty for like some hot takes, I think, at this time of year. So it just kind of happens every single cycle.
Yeah, that's funny. Our imaginations go exactly inverted to the amount of information we're getting. So, before we forget, like, what do you got that you want to plug here right now? I know you got your hands in a lot of different pots, but tell us what's going on for you.
Sure. I've actually kind of consolidated things over the years. I kind of got tired of having like a half dozen 1099s to sort through. I got over at Mojo and kind of consolidated things and actually got out of the content game for the most part, other than like some, spotty promos and show visits and things like that. But now I'm actually at A to Z Sports, which we've got national coverage all over the country for NFL. But we're expanding the college side this year. And so that's where I come in. So I'm actually the college football managing editor there. We're building out the team ahead of the season at A to Z Sports. We'll be covering probably about 12 to 15 different programs really closely at kind of like team beat level. And so I'll be doing a lot of that, helping with some beats that we already kind of have in place with Ohio State, Georgia. Just hired somebody who's definitely going to be helping out with some of the Texas schools, as well as even some LSU coverage. So lots of college football specific coverage there at A to Z Sports, but I do throw in some fantasy football nuggets on the College2Canton podcast with Stefan Leco, my buddy there. Both of us longtime Rotoviz contributors. So definitely check that out as well. But really just two places, just the College2Canton show for the most part, and then some lots of writing and a few other things at A to Z Sports now. So, yeah.
Awesome. I'm super excited for you, man. It sounds like you guys got a good thing going on at A to Z. We talked about that a little bit before the show, but love seeing you guys grow the brand, and it's always nice to have more voices in the national media for college football sometimes, so that coverage can be thin if you're not in a specific area. So that's
absolutely, man. I feel like the group is shrinking that covers it kind of at a national level well. And so I really want to add to that and hopefully expand some team specific coverage that doesn't exist in the way that, us fantasy folks really like it, specifically, because I think there's lots of fun angles in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. And the podcast is great too. Definitely DM me a link. We'll put it in the show notes on this one, so people can click through to there from here. We definitely have some overlapping spheres of interest, so that's phenomenal. So, man, we'll put you in the driver's seat for a second here. What's your overall thoughts on this class? How does it compare to recent classes? How does the QB class compare to other position groups in here? Kind of, take that how you will. Give us your thoughts.
Yeah, so outside of, in terms of like comparing this year to recent classes, it's a little bit too early to have, massive takeaways from 2023 because we only saw a few games rather, out of Anthony Richardson. Saw, kind of a good sample on Levis, but we weren't, through the roof on him as a collective group anyway. And Bryce Young, it's just 1 year, and CJ Stroud is obviously the second coming. So he's amazing. But like the takeaways, they're still flexible for last year. But outside of like 2020, if you look at all of the recent classes, like since, I don't know, Patrick Mahomes here when he came out in 2017, almost every single year, you're missing, way less than half if all of the quarterbacks are not starting with the original team anymore. It's really hard to find a franchise quarterback. 2020, obviously, you got Justin Herbert and you got Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa, and I mean it's a really good group. out of that year. But that's really, for the most part, it. Because like now, like even Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, Zach Wilson and Matt
Mm,
Jones, and like we haven't had a really great quarterback class for a while, and so we're kind of thirsty.
mm,
You're gonna have that. It's been 4 draft cycles at least since we had a complete successful group, and this year
mm,
might be another one though. I think there's lots of promise. To say that there's a generational prospect in this one might be too hyperbolic there, but if anyone is close to that, it is certainly Caleb Williams. I think,
mm.
everyone wants to compare him to the Patrick Mahomes because of all the off schedule and off platform
Yeah.
and crazy weird throws that he does make, but he's definitely not straight up comp necessarily for him. But Caleb Williams is fantastic, and so I've no we can get into some of his numbers here shortly, but he is very very freaking good. And outside of that, I mean Drake May, he had kind of a quote unquote down year in terms of his slower start, kind of fiery middle to the season when Devontae Walker came in, and then he kind of struggled a little bit down the stretch. Jaden Daniels, of course, put like basically the most efficient passing season of like ever, maybe like it was
Mm.
third. And then added 1,200 yards on the ground to go with that. So it looks promising as well outside of his sack numbers. And then JJ McCarthy, small sample, high rate stats guy that is super promising. So 4 quarterbacks, I think, stand alone now. It looked like 3-3, but now it looks like 4-2.
Mm.
Bo Nix out of Oregon and Michael Penix of Washington, of course, being kind of 5-6, at least by consensus now. And then even a couple of deeper shots like with Spencer Rattler, Jordan Travis, who's coming off an injury or, might do something in the right spot in backup duty relief. But it looks like more or less we're looking at 6 guys who have any significant shot to be starters at the NFL level, with 4 having a greater chance than others. So that's my kind of overview. And that seems like the consensus as it stands today. But we can get into the more nitty gritty comparisons and numbers if you like.
Yeah, I think let's deep dive into the guys. But before that, I think I'm interested personally in hearing like just kind of what your process is for evaluating quarterbacks. I know I see some data from you on Twitter. I know you watch some film. How do you blend those? What stats do you care about? Just what's your process in a nutshell without giving away your secret sauce?
Yeah, I think if anybody had like the true secret sauce, like they'd be making a lot of freaking
They'd
money
be
right
rich.
now, and some of them kind of are already. But it's funny when at the NFL Combine, at the Senior Bowl, over the last couple of years working for Mojo, even building like some prospecting models, like I'm trying to learn from some real live NFL staffers that are in analytics departments and in scouting roles, and just kind of like pick the brains of people who are actively doing this, and you can learn a lot, but you also kind of realize how clueless everyone else still is at
I think
quarterback.
the
And
results are evidence of
yeah,
that too.
right. And it's not that I'm like saying they're like not smart. I'm saying like, no, they're very smart and this is very hard. So
Right.
like, like they have great data where they have great modeling practices. It's hard to kind of analyze the most complex position in all of sports. That is quarterbacks,
Yeah.
So
I feel like
um,
part of it is like none of these guys are coming in as like fully formed football players, right? More at this
right.
position more than anywhere else. I mean, it's true of every position. These are kids, right? But
Hmm.
quarterbacks, I mean, just none of these guys is like an elite NFL player yet. And there's a lot of projection that has to happen from A to B. And I think, in 2021, 2022, like things just didn't come to be, right? Like the
Yeah.
guys couldn't take the next step or didn't land in the right place, didn't get the right coaching, whatever it is.
Yeah. For me, though, like in terms of my process, I think it really begins because I'm like a big recruiting nerd. Like for high school to college translation, I'm really into that. So I mean, I'm like watching some of these guys just to kind of familiarize myself with their game. As soon as they have like a 24/7 page, like if
Mhm.
they like a 24/7 sports or on 3 page at all, like I'm probably figuring out who they are and who they have offers with. And if somebody has more than 10 offers and they're a quarterback, I probably know who they are by the time they're 15 or 16. And so like
Right.
I kind of start watching some of their game because you don't have a lot of advanced stats that are reliable. Like some programs keep track of their high school stats, but they're padded. So it's
Right.
building predictive modeling off of high school stats that doesn't really do well, especially we're trying to predict NFL futures. But that's kind of where I began, familiarize myself with them. And when you do it that early, you really see players grow and change and become completely different versions of themselves, whether it's adding 30 or 40 pounds to their frame or growing 4 or 5 inches over the time that you're familiarizing yourselves with these players. It's funny just to kind of watch the journey from that beginning to the pros, and in some nerdy leagues, drafting these players the summer before that they're even in college, just because I play college fantasy stuff. So way back then, just foundationally, that's where I began, just to kind of watch the progression. But ahead of the NFL draft process, I've probably watched at some point, I don't know, 20 to 30 games of most players, like in the quarterback position specifically. So from a film standpoint, you really get to kind of understand over the years, what scheme are they running? Like, how much play action do they run to kind of boost their efficiency? Like, how much do they utilize pre-snap motion and pre-snap adjustments in their own calls? Like, how does that actually translate to the next level? You kind of understand just by watching enough that you see what kind of player they are cerebrally without having to necessarily, interview them. Like, sometimes you can't get a perfect view if it's a really super quarterback friendly offense like Tennessee. But you can learn a whole lot about what quarterbacks are doing, how they're making adjustments, how well they do with pressure just by watching. But to supplement any of that, you really want to make sure that what you're seeing agrees with the actual meaningful metrics. And so every single season, I build kind of like this guardrails model every single week that updates, that measures key statistics, like their overall quarterback rating, like a custom QBR, another custom pass efficiency metric. I look at adjusted yards per team pass attempt, which kind of like builds in touchdowns, interceptions, and the overall yards per attempt. I look at EPA per play numbers, which is expected points added per play. I look at yards per play. I look at rushing yard market share, which is just the percent of a team's rushing yards that a quarterback plays and accounts for. All these kind of threshold metrics that you want to see them at least pass the smell test. And when you kind of mold, 15, 16 meaningful metrics in terms of predicting capital together, you can kind of get a pretty nice historical, percentile score in comparing all these quarterbacks to each other. So that's what I like to do. And for a while, I was doing that full time, trying to build predictive modeling for Mojo in the sports stock market. Now I'm doing that as I'm kind of preparing to upload all these metrics to a new site called the Scout the Stat Line, which is I'm really excited to be a part of that. So you'll be looking for that here soon. I'll have a lot of kind of custom quarterback metrics over there in the near future, just because I wanted to have a place for all this work that I put in building the stock market into a place where, hey, I've got all these metrics that mean something for NFL success. So I do that. So it's kind of a mix of data and several years of following these players. I don't know. In many cases, I've followed these players 6 years, but by the time they're 7 years, by the time they're a pro. So it's just it's a long but really, really fun process.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, obviously we're a college and Canton show too. So yeah, I mean, I think you're probably into it a little bit earlier. I catch the end of the recruiting cycle, right? And then kind of start scouting them as seniors and juniors. But it sounds like we're interested in the same metrics here too. I mean, I think you probably sound like you're doing more customization of the metrics, but like those are the things I care about too, right? I care about, QBR. I like TD interception ratio to some degree, EPA per play. All those things integrated in my model, which seems to be pretty predictive of draft capital. But then obviously the past few years, at least, I thought it was great a couple of years ago, but now we got like the Fields and the Mac Jones and all these guys that like Bryce Young looked great in the model and haven't played well in the pros. But that I might just be chalking it up to the nature of the beast, unless you're finding some ways to screen these guys that I'm not.
Well, one thing that I think the most meaningful pass game isolation kind of metric that I've created that I'm going to be integrating it into what we call our peak projections, which is trying to isolate for like what does the peak season of a player look like based on their profile going in. And the Scout the Stat Line site that I mentioned before they've done a really good job on the baseball side, because baseball in general, there's a lot of more. There's the number of sticky stats in baseball because of like the samples you're working with, because of the individual isolated matchups that you're dealing with, is so much more reliable than football. They've done really good at that kind of peak, like that peak build. And so that's what I want to kind of solve for and build around the distribution of like how players, like what shape of production in terms of the overall accumulated production of a player's career. What does that look like? What should it look like if I can perhaps calculate for some confidence level in their peak, And so without getting into the nitty gritty of that, like in depth, I adjust for things like average depth of target, play action percentage, jet motion percent, all types of pre-snap motion percentages, and then build a customized version of completion percentage over expected and adjusted yards per pass attempt, and meld those together. And that gives you kind of like one historical percentile score. And so some of the best scores ever in that metric have been Joe Burrow, CJ Stroud, even Jalen Hurts. Actually, his peak season at Oklahoma was like a 99 percentile kind of year. So isolating for that kind of a schematic boost within I guess players' schemes in college can be super predictive. It doesn't have a 100% hit rate. Absolutely not. If anybody's model does, they're overfitting, and it's definitely wrong. So, but like, it helps you identify like, hey, even though that there was some weird narrative about the perfections of Justin Herbert's profile when he came out, he was still way, way, way up there for 2 seasons even. So like, so I don't know. It definitely helps sift through things. And it actually did have Bryce Young a tier lower than a CJ Stroud. And so that's why I was kind of higher on him versus Young. So if it's not a great like 1-to-1 ranking system, but if you group kind of tiers together, it can kind of help you find some differentiated ranks.
Yeah, no, I'd love that. I have to look into that. That's over my skill level to adjust for scheme. I totally get the concepts, though. You want to take away the high percentile, like low risk, like stat padding kind of action from the scheme, and it makes a ton of sense. Yeah. All right, I feel like we could probably spend 3 hours talking about nerdy scouting stuff with you and I, but I'm sure no one else wants to watch that except like 3 people on the planet. So let's dig into this class more. I mean, obviously, QB1, Caleb Williams. I'll throw up some film. I got some all 22 from our friends at Dynasty Nerds, our official film vendor. Throw that up. But talk us through Caleb. What do you like? What do you not like? I mean, I know there's some flaws, but overall the production profile is pretty impressive, right? So what do you love about Caleb?
So, I mean, Caleb Williams does a lot of great things after the snap. I think how he adjusts to pressure and how he adjusts for it pre-snap can definitely improve, because when he does get pressures, a lot of times it's, a free blitzer or something weird like that. And so there's some pre-snap work that I think he could probably improve on, but his adjustments after the play, I mean, it's just elite. So like how he kind of adjusts and gets to a second, third read real quick, knowing how the play is going post snap, is crazy underrated. I think it's just, and I say it's underrated. It's hard to say anything that's underrated with Caleb Williams, but it is, because it's like the best we've seen coming out in terms of his like post snap processing in the last, I don't know, 6-7 years, in my opinion, maybe even longer. So for me, I love a lot of that aspect of his game, but where he kind of knows where every piece of every play is going to be, it's just phenomenal. Like that shows up all over the place. And so I love that practical aspect of his game. But analytically speaking, even his first year at Oklahoma, he had, like, by most measures, when you adjust even for scheme with Lincoln Riley's system, like he had like a 90th percentile plus kind of season as a true freshman. So it was against a softer schedule in the games in which he actually played, but even so, just kind of a wild, productive year. And then he had, the Heisman season, which was one of the best seasons we've ever seen at the quarterback position by all the meaningful metrics you want to kind of throw out there. And then even last year, when he kind of had a down moment or two in the middle of the season, it didn't matter. He was still like a top 5 quarterback in the game. So there's not much to hate when it comes to Caleb Williams. Like, people want to kind of talk about like his time to throw or whatever. time to throw in general is not sticky and predictive, because it's super noisy, because what you're doing and adjusting for after the snap and how you deal with pressure that you might bring on yourself because you hold the ball, because you're trying to create a ridiculous play like he does. I think that's why it's so noisy and not super meaningful in terms of time to throw metrics, because he does kind of bring a lot of pressure on himself. You're seeing it right now as we're talking. Like he's immediately rolling out and running into pressure and then making the play anyway. And so one of the metrics I'm still working on and improving is this kind of sack probability over expected model. And he tests really well in that, because despite bringing pressure on himself at a higher rate than you probably should, how he deals with that pressure over the expectation of that pressure rate is impressive. Does that make sense? Like you can have a high pressure rate, and even if you bring more on yourself, if you're still having a high percentage of positive plays in those scenarios, it's less concerning than a player who just takes way too many freaking sacks,
So how do you, that's a different thing than like pressure to sack rate. His pressure to sack rate's pretty bad, but you think because generally the way, like subjectively or like in a non-simple data manner, the way that he generally deals with pressure, you're not super worried.
Yes. So pressure to sack rate, that's kind of another, that's becoming more commonly talked about. Like I think in this class, there are concerns with like both Drake Maye and even Jaden Daniels, because like Jaden Daniels is like 24% for his career. Drake Maye is just over 20% for his career. And that's not great, but you can adjust for different things that are not just that one raw percentile, and understand that, hey, if the overall contributions of a player are massively efficient, despite taking some sacks in moments where it makes sense to, and there's actually still a massive percentage of the time that you're creating excess value on plays, the pressure to sack doesn't mean as much for certain players, if that makes sense.
So. Right. No, I mean, I think that's the reason that, in the data models we use like production, like general production and things like that, rather than like pressure to sack doesn't really help your model if you put it in. Like the data says that it's not relevant, right? Yeah. Or it's already picked up somewhere else, right? It's coming out in your stats and in your turnover ratio.
Like it's just it's easily put into place to be kind of some sort of collinearity issue, like if that makes sense. Like it's just double counting. It's going to reaffirm what you're already trying to prove if you try to slide it in. So
right, 100%.
Which is awesome. Frankly a lot of variables that we want to kind of piece together. But that's a different conversation.
I am learning that in doing my own modeling to try to eliminate the collinearity. I've been working on it this year. So awesome. So post snap processing, he's elite to you. What other traits are good? What other traits? Is there any traits that are concerning to you and not good? Or where else in the discourse do you see a void that like isn't really talked about, but that you think there's something relevant to add?
To be honest, at this point, like Caleb Williams, for those who have already been following him for multiple years, there's not much that hasn't been talked about. I think some of it is like tied to his dad and like the personality stuff that kind of gets thrown out there. Like, cause I don't know, since age 15, well, before that even, but like it came into the national media stratosphere. Like, hey, our only goal is to be the number 1 overall pick. Everything that we do, everything that I do as a dad of Caleb Williams, like, everything, they've been really strategic. Like he's been coached up by professionals for more than half a decade to get to this point. And so that weird kind of like, there's certain weird personality things and stuff like with hey, he doesn't want to be even medically examined by all the teams in the NFL, or he doesn't want to, do this or that, having equity invested in an NFL team while also being the quarterback. Like there's a bunch of weird stuff that normal players wouldn't bring up, but he's just not a normal player. Like even among other quarterback prospects who are going to be top 5 picks, they're not Caleb Williams. Like they haven't been the biggest freaking deal in the country for 6 or 7 years. Like he has. Drake Maye was a highly touted prospect. He was like a top 70-ish or whatever recruit, but that's not number 1 quarterback in his class for 3 straight years before he even got to college. That's not dethroning, another number one quarterback prospect in his class, and Spencer Rattler immediately once he gets to Oklahoma, and then transferring to USC with one of the flashiest offensive coaches. And, there's just so many layers that make him somebody we've overanalyzed for so long that I think at this point we're just nitpicking. Let's just appreciate the absurdity that is Caleb Williams' skill set and recognize that he's going to hit unless the Bears do what they've done to every other quarterback in the history of their franchise.
Look, at least they have some weapons. Like, you got to feel a little bit better about the Bears this week than you did a month ago. Just they're trying to put talent around him.
Yeah, I mean the Allen trade. I mean, they've got DJ Moore already in place. I mean, they're trying to get him the weapons that he needs, and so I'm excited to see what happens there, because he might be the best quarterback with the best weapons that the Bears have had in ever.
Since I've been watching football, for sure.
Yeah, so we'll see.
Awesome.
But I'm incredibly high on him.
Do you like Shane Waldron?
I guess I know that the right system, right GMs, right coaching staff, like that's key. But I also do think that gets thrown around a little bit too much in terms of how it impacts quarterbacks. Like, it's like, well, it's just the system, because we like to kind of have, confirmation bias in our prospecting, and like, well, it was just, the system around him that failed him. He's actually a really good player, and I'm actually right. But, so, but yeah, I just think it would take a lot for Caleb Williams to not work out.
For sure. All right. So who's your number 2, Daniels or Maye?
I would say it's very close, but there are different prospects for sure. I think for a long time it was Drake Maye, but through the first 3 or 4 weeks last year, I remember talking with some of my buddies who, are other, fellow Campus to Canton nerds. And I was like, guys, all of you, go to your favorite sports book of choice and drop whatever money on Jaden Daniels Heisman, because he's on a trajectory to put up one of the best seasons of all time. Like, it was, I don't remember which game it was the final tipping point that it became more obvious in kind of the national viewpoint that he was going to be in the Heisman conversation. But Jaden Daniels just had an amazingly special season last year. Like, if you try to model from a nerdy, meaningful metric standpoint, his year last year, he breaks everything. Like, if you like, my kind of guardrails model is supposed to be anchored around like the number 50 and scale from 0 to 100. I had to manually nerf things so that his score wouldn't break my model and go way above 100, because.
And you're using like best season stats primarily.
For the last year's individual season stats, because he was just too far ahead of every other quarterback by like multiple metrics in multiple areas. When you look at his like adjusted yards per pass attempt, it was like 14 or something absurd for most of the season. And so we didn't even see guys get above 10 until like a decade ago, and he's just breaking the sport of football with his efficiency. And it helps that he has Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors, who are just next level first round prospects in their own right. But his mobility is what makes him a ridiculous threat, in that he can take any play to the house at any freaking moment. We're watching the play against one of the many plays against Florida right now on the screen. I mean, whether it's him breaking out of the pocket or staying in the pocket and adding value, he always finds ways to add positive value on a play. Now, I will say Jaden Daniels does sometimes take the 8-yard gain when there's probably a 22-yard play, and because I think he's just looking for the positive play, and he knows his legs can get him there. So I hope that doesn't get him in trouble at the next level, because he's a little bit slight in frame. And if he starts taking hits at the next level, he's going to struggle to stay healthy. So he's probably going to have to be smarter about in picking his spots and just making the difficult second level play that is there, rather than settling for an 8-12-yard run gain. That's probably the one thing that I would pick about him. But in terms of his pressure to sack issues and dealing with sacks, that's kind of been his popular knock as of late. he's actually been on a positive trend over the past couple years. I believe last year was still around 20% in terms of his pressure to sack rate, but that is actually almost identical to what Drake Maye's was last year. So that's an area that he needs to clean up. But and he brings pressure on himself sometimes. But just like Caleb Williams, I'm less concerned because of the explosive plays and added value that he creates with his legs and with his newfound deep ball accuracy that he didn't really have for much of his career. So, I just like Jaden Daniels quite a bit. It's very close between he and Drake Maye, but his confidence in his deep ball has just exponentially gone up in his time at LSU.
You know what? Throwing to Neighbors and Brian Johnson might help that though a little bit. They're getting open downfield. They're making plays. Supposed to, he didn't really have the best cast in Arizona. Cowling wasn't there yet, right? Who was he throwing to?
Arizona State. He had Brandon Ayuk in his very first year,
right?
And so he actually had a good weapon. And that's actually kind of why he kind of flashed and did really well out of the gate, because who knew he had a first-round wide receiver he was throwing it to. But after that, the Arizona State program, with the COVID and the illegal recruiting and whatever program sanctions and all that mess. Just lots of turmoil just at the program. The wheels came off, and it wasn't necessarily his fault. It was just a lot of, external and internal coaching, poor decisions that kind of had that program as a whole fall apart. And so he needed a fresh start. And when he transferred to LSU, he wasn't even promised to be the starter because Garrett Nussmeier's good in his own right, but he did. He won the day probably because of his mobility. But once he finally got comfortable in the offensive system, he just reached a level of quarterback efficiency that we really haven't seen. So, like this play right here, the freaking run against Florida, that long. That wasn't even his longest one. That was one of the longer runs against Florida. He just creates there's nothing there. He sees, and no one can keep up with him, and that's gonna keep happening even at the next level because it looks like people are standing still.
He is legit fast. I don't think he's not like as elusive as like a Lamar Jackson or like powerful as a runner as like Hurts, but he is freaking fast, man. So love it. And then the other good thing I like about Daniels, even is his career like turnover worthy plays rate is like super low. Like he is smart with the football, and I like that, man, because you start throwing 2 or 3 interceptions a game in the NFL, and you're not going to have very long of a career.
Yeah, and that speaks to that. Like, hey, he takes that 8-yard play, that 12-yard play when there's probably a 25 one out there, because he's just looking to, hey, look, we just got to stay on the field. I'm going to keep making the right plays. I'm going to keep on getting us a position to score. And so that confidence just shows up, and it just needs to show up more and more. So like, hey, I'm going to hit this backside, this backside corner. Like that's really my third read, but I've got some time, So there's room for development still, but incredibly high on him.
Yeah. Now, are you worried about older prospects continuing to develop after they get in the NFL? I mean, that's a thing that I think is a real concern, just what we've seen like anecdotally lately with guys like Pickett. Like it feels like he was maxed out. He was as good as he was going to get in his 5th season. Do you think that's a concern for Daniels, for Bo Nix, for Penix, for these guys that are coming in older?
I think especially at like wide receiver and other positions where you want them to be incredibly young coming in, just for like, especially like running back, just for usage thresholds and like sticking and like shelf life and being able to just stay healthy. But a quarterback is a little bit different. And having talked to multiple GMs about this class at the combine, most of them actually still valued that experience. Like they're not concerned as much with a Bo Nix, with a Michael Penix, like having a long resume and being a little bit older. Yes, it would be kind of cool if they had just done what they did when they were 21, 22. But whether it's valid or not, a lot of people in the league still value that experience and don't have as many questions. And that's probably why we still see the 23-year-old quarterbacks, 24 get looks in early rounds when they do have medical issues to go along with the age concerns and maybe super small sample sizes of peak efficiency, you probably should question it. Like with Kenny Pickett, he was basically just an absolute mid nothing for his entire
until
career,
his 5th year,
until his final year. And when you're an absolute mid nothing for your entire career, except for one season, well, you probably should have questions in that regard. But with Daniels, he flashed when he was 18 years old. Like we saw
early,
the upside.
he was good in his 4th year, right?
Yeah, and anecdotally, there were things that contributed to his weird mid-career drop-off, like we already talked about. So just understanding the full picture can really help understand, a player's arc and why they may or may not have broken out early. But in Pickett's, like, he had no excuse. Like, he was just not good. Like, I remember in a fantasy draft, I think as kind of a joke, I picked him in like round 45 or maybe 50. It was whatever it was. It was the last round in a Canton league the year before he went off and inevitably became a first-round pick. And then I was like, wow, that worked out. He went from like, maybe he'll be my quarterback 4 or 5 to use for college production for 1 year to first-round pick status, which that's the kind of player you just move off of in fantasy leagues, because it's just like, that's an obvious miss. Like, and even in rookie drafts, he wasn't a first pick in super flex leagues because I think people just understood. But I don't get that vibe profile wise or upside wise or even further development wise from like a guy like Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, and I'm with you. Daniels definitely flashed earlier in his career, right? So yeah, very different profile than like Pickett for sure. All right, Drake Ray. Let's talk some Drake Maye. Again, you said he was your number 2. I mean, he's been kind of like the 2 times the 1B in popular discourse in this class. So let's talk us through where you're at on Drake Maye.
Yeah, so Drake Maye, there was a lot of pressure because the quarterback who was before him was Sam Howell, and Howell flashed right away with like 30 passing touchdowns or whatever as a true freshman. Drake Maye came in as a sophomore, 2nd year, whatever it was, in his eligibility, and put up one of the best seasons we'd ever seen in college in terms of like when you mix all of his he actually rushed a little bit more in 2022 as well. So added some rushing value, high elite deep like field deep down the field kind of throws, mixed it with great efficiency. He obviously had some decent weapons. He was throwing with Josh Downs, who turned out to be a decent pro even already this past year. Kind of had to, similar to Sam Howell, kind of had to reset with his weapons not being very good at all last year. And really his best weapon was Devontae Walker, and the NCAA, stepped on their own face and just, kept him off field to begin the year.
Yeah, what a mess that was.
Yeah, that was an absolute just travesty that Devontae Walker couldn't play every single game. And when he did come in, Drake Maye did improve, and Devontae Walker had 7 touchdowns in his 8 games last year. He actually
3 in the first one.
Yeah, exactly. He was really efficient and became the only legit weapon that Maye had to play with. But then teams adjusted again and kind of just took him away, and Drake Maye kind of forced things down the stretch some. So you kind of had a tale of like this, like mid high point of the season, sandwiched around some kind of questionable decisions. But the high moments with Drake Maye are just like, oh my gosh, like how did you just put the ball there? Like the ball placement downfield, up the seam, in between 2 defenders. Like he does that kind of throw, and you're like, okay, that's it. That is that dude.
That was a nice start right there.
Yeah, exactly. So like it's just, and the way I was just going to talk about off platform, like he can do that too. So you can buy your time. He's got the size, he's got the arm to make all the throws, whether he's got perfect feet under him or not. So every once in a while he'll just make an absolutely boneheaded play because he's trying to force it. And that just shows up more than you like to see. And then, because he's trying to force it and make a play with his legs even, he'll put him in situations where he kind of brings pressure on himself, and that shows up in his pressure to sack stats as well as a few other rates metrics when it comes to sacks. So yeah, that needs to be cleaned up. But wherever he goes, whether it's Washington or whether it's New England or somebody else trades up, and there's been some recent buzz because McCown
Vikings
is McCown is the Vikings quarterback coach and had the personal ties to Maye before. Like maybe they try to make that happen, but I think the Vikings want McCarthy, so we'll see. But I think in every single world he should be a top 3 quarterback in this class, given the resume, the 2 amazing seasons, and even one of the better seasons we've ever seen in 2022. So I like all the traits, and his profile is good enough to be an early first round pick.
Yeah. I think where I'm at in general with quarterback prospecting is like, the meme that goes around and it's like the dumb guy thinks this, like, oh, he was productive, so he's good. And then the middle, it's like, oh, but what about all his flaws? And he's up. And then at the bottom, it's like the smart guy that's like, oh, he was productive, so he's good. I'm kind of there with this, like the guys that come out well on the production model. I feel like all the other nitpicking we do is that, right?
Yeah, it really is in many cases.
So my 2 questions for you about Maye. I mean, the latest, putting him under a microscope has really been people talking about his footwork, talking about some sloppiness in the mechanics. Like, is that something to be concerned about, or is that something to think, hey, this kid can get better if he cleans this up?
I think it's the kid can get better if he cleans it up, and I think that's what a lot of NFL teams are like. Oh man, once we get him with our coaching,
right,
we'll fix him. But like he doesn't have like crazy drastic issues. He's not going to completely rebuild his throwing motion or anything like Josh Allen had to do. Like Josh Allen, going the weird JUCO route to Wyoming, did not have good college coaching at all, and was running for his life at all times. And any way you slice up his production profile, like even in the schematic, scheme adjusted pass efficiency model I mentioned before, like you have to even in that measure, his peak season was like barely in like the 60 percentile kind of range, like one of the worst for first round quarterbacks in recent classes. Mm-hmm. But with him, like he had all the tools, and Drake Maye has all the tools. Like he has the physical build and mobility requisite enough to succeed in the NFL that you see it. And so, he, whatever you want to do, whether it's Justin Herbert or Josh Allen, probably not the greatest one-to-one comp, but there's similarities in that there are imperfections with decisions, but Maye's profile is way better than that. Like his peak season was like 94th percentile by the most meaningful passing metrics. So yeah,
you can't even find Josh Allen in my model. You gotta like scroll.
You gotta scroll. Yeah, scroll. But hey, you know what? He's nowhere near as bad actually. When compared to Anthony Richardson, but that's probably another conversation for another day.
That's kind of what I was thinking, because Richardson's mechanics weren't great, but they were improving. And I was like, God, man, if this kid gets some coaching and figures this out, he's going to be a monster. And he looked like he made improvement.
We'll see.
Example. So I guess my one other question for you, and this is a fantasy football thing, which our content's been not necessarily that today. Do you think Maye runs at the next level, or do you think they keep him more as like a pocket passer plus?
Yeah, I think honestly, the non-running successful NFL quarterback is dead. It no longer exists. Like we saw, like the twilight years for Tom Brady still go pretty well, but that's because it's Tom Brady, and he had as many NFL years as experience as most rookies will have in their lives coming in, and so the experience boost in having that level of just edge over everyone else is kind of unmatched. So we had like this old guard of, statues of like stature quarterbacks that were still sticking around, finding some kind of level of success because they were just old, had 10,000 NFL career snaps.
Experience.
Yes. I mean, yeah. And even like, I think the last one that's not like super mobile, that's probably going to age out is probably Stafford and Cousins. Those are probably it. Like after that, we won't ever see another one be successful that doesn't add 200 plus rushing yards a year. Like it just won't exist. So, I think NFL teams want to build that in too much. College programs are building that in too much. And if you're not athletic enough to actually, get away from a 300-pound defensive tackle, then you're just going to be Mac Jones. So
yeah, it's going to be a rough life.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So
and that's already, and by the way, that's not like anecdotal. Like that is already confirmed to be like that's showing up for the last decade really solidly, almost 100% miss rate. If you don't have like at least 5% rushing yard market share, you're a miss. Yeah.
Nice. Good to know. Good to know. I think there's a couple people in this class that people liked, but or even to get who was a kid from Nevada a couple of years ago that was just the statue.
Yeah, that was never ever gonna. There was a 0% chance that was ever gonna happen because like he couldn't even move, and unfortunately, like he had medical stuff. Like it just
right. The knees.
Yeah.
All right. So McCarthy's your QB4.
Yeah. Honestly, I was holding up because I was uncertain where the league kind of felt with him for a long while. I was like, okay, because some people that I talked to, even at the Senior Bowl, were like, and maybe it was just because it was at the Senior Bowl, like, hey, man, we're going to see Bo Nix or we're going to see Michael Penix like take the next step this week. And they just didn't. Like they were just kind of meh like that week. And I think it was the tipping point for, I don't know, most every NFL decision maker probably that week. No, actually, JJ McCarthy's the clear 4 after seeing Bo Nix and Michael Penix up close. And it wasn't that they were bad. It's just like they're, early day 2 prospects, and so that's okay. It's just McCarthy, I think he looks more moldable, like getting back to that conversation, than the other guys. Cause like he has a third of the career pass attempts that Bo Nix does. So yeah, there's lots of fun upside because the little things that he does right in terms of making good decisions back to back to back, and even in the smaller sample size, is just phenomenal with his game. I actually talked to him at the combine about like, dude, like you just make good decisions. Like, and, I don't think a lot of people understand how good your rate stats are, even if they are a smaller sample. Like, what do you do to make that happen? And he talked a little bit about like the process and. But also just being able to like give you just taking what the defense gives you, like that's not a bad thing. And so, and a lot of people want to knock him for that. That's what makes him good. Like he knows where every aspect of the play is and the defense is.
Right.
And he just like, I'm just going to take that deep out and I'm not going to, force the deep ball here 40 yards downfield, or I'm not, I'm not going to, hey, I'm getting pressured here. I'm going to hit my outlet. It's just he's a great, smart player. And that's why by like the positional kind of like QB efficiency composite that I build every year, he was the top 5 or 6 quarterback in the country behind only Jaden Daniels. And this is just metrics, by the way, not like how I rank them. Behind only Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, like Dylan Gabriel, because his season was ridiculous for Oklahoma, and Caleb Williams. It was then him. And so by the metrics, even though the volume wasn't there, the rate stats that mean something were. And so I just didn't know until I was at the Senior Bowl how high the NFL was going to be. But from that point on, betting markets felt that too. I think a lot of informed people were like, okay, the NFL shifted and he's the clear 4, if not even higher for some staffs.
Yeah. So I know kind of how I feel about McCarthy. I feel like all the 3 guys ahead of him, I love them. I love the talent. I love the production profiles. They all have some red flags, things that if they don't figure it out could hamper their, capacity to really be elite at the next level. I don't think McCarthy really has any of those. Like the production model, he's the 6th. He's behind Bo Nix in mine. But like, I can't find anything like wrong with his game. Like you said, he's smart, doesn't turn the ball over. He is athletic. He just didn't have to run much in Michigan because he had great production and, wide receivers that gave him a little bit of help getting open. So does that track with you, or did you have a different take on him than I do?
Yeah, and actually he's mobile, definitely mobile enough. Like he's honestly, it's really odd, but in some ways, he kind of barely crests like the mobility threshold. It's kind of like peak Tua, I think, was only 6 or 7% rushing yard market share in his season. Like McCarthy was like 8 or 9 or something through the regular season.
Yeah, he's like 9% career.
Yeah, and so it's not like through the roof. Normally, you want to see guys in college even getting like the 15% or more kind of threshold for super confidence in success. but because his passing thresholds are fine, I'm less concerned. But I do wonder what the upside is with him, given for fantasy football purposes, given that he's probably not going to be a really hyper mobile guy, but I think he does add 200, 300 rushing yards here and there at the next level, because I think NFL teams will take advantage of his mobility.
Yeah.
Which is underrated.
Yeah, I hope so, because that is my concern. Like, again, like in a fantasy football perspective, if he doesn't run and he's this short area, intermediate area pocket passer, he's not good for fantasy football, although he might, be a successful NFL quarterback, and give a team some production. If he ain't running and he's not like a master of the deep ball, he's not going to be.
Yeah, he might just get labeled like a Kirk Cousins, who is one of the most productive quarterbacks of all time. Right. Like one of the most productive guys of all time has been like a top 12 quarterback for a decade, and no one cares because he can't be a quarterback one, so he must be bad. Like, so,
I don't know, man. Cousins is like free money in Superflex leagues. He was like the QB like 4 through 8 for like 5 years.
I know, and people are like, yeah, he's bad. Like, no, okay, that's fine. Everywhere then. Yeah,
it's great. All right, so who do you prefer as your fifth and sixth? Is it Nix then Penix, or is it Penix then Nix?
I think Nix. Penix, I think, is the medicals are going to be interesting because he had four like season-ending kind of injuries, which is just absolutely crazy. So I'm not sure what things are going to look like there, as well as the late kind of surge he had. I guess it was his 2019 season actually at Indiana was low-key interesting. That was actually his DeVore year. And so that's probably why DeVore wanted him to come out to Washington, because he saw the promise. And so, like Daniels, there was at least a glimpse, probably about 6, maybe 6 games or whatever it was that year, that I think were really high level play. Right? Yeah. I can't remember exactly how long it was, but he was really, really, really promising. So I think in that way, there's a lot of promise, but he has all these injuries, and he does not run. He does not crest the even like kind of minimum thresholds that you want to see in terms of rushing yards, like negative for most of last season, because of all the lack of mobility. So he does avoid sacks at an elite rate. I think his pressure to sack rate was like 8%, which is otherworldly. He wasn't pressured that much at all either, so that kind of helps you out. But the type of pressure, in many cases, was not like complete offensive line collapse into unavoidable sack territory. But yeah, I do have some mobility concerns with him. Whereas we actually saw Bo Nix put like a dozen scores on the ground or something crazy last year. Like he actually has some low key, underrated mobility that makes him a lot of fun. And his quick processing
for CFF, right?
Yeah, it's just I mean, he was really freaking good. Like, and so is he going to be a 500, 600, 700 rusher and Nix that is the next level per year? I don't think so, but he just makes the right decision quite a bit. He didn't always at Auburn always tried to like swing for the fences because the offensive system was weird. There's a lot of putt horizontal nonsense. It's just the Gus Malzahn way, but we really saw him develop and he's one of those players that I have watched since, I don't know, he was 15 or 16, because he was an Auburn legacy. He was supposed to be a big thing. He was a 5-star. Expectations were high. Auburn went through kind of a rough patch when he was there. But when he was in a system with good weapons, man, he blew it out of the water for 2 years at Oregon. And so, yes, the average depth of target was one of the lowest in the country. Lots of screens, lots of quick slants, lots of easy pitch and catch. And his offensive line, by lots of the metrics last year, was like the best in the country. Like the pass block win rates, pass block efficiency of his offensive line was phenomenal. He was pressured in the single digits in terms of like per snap facing pressure for most of last year. Like it was over halfway through the season, he had like a pressured rate of like 7-8%. It's like, what is going on? Like he's not even ever being pressured. And yeah, it's because he gets rid of the ball in like 2.5 seconds on average. But still, it was just unreal how little pressure he was facing. So that makes him a little bit of a weird eval. I don't think a team should take him at 12 or 13 for the Broncos or the Raiders. But I do know that the Raiders seem to be super interested based off some things that I learned at the combine from Tom Telesco specifically. But I think it would make sense for him to be their second round pick rather than a first.
Right. So do you think he has limitations at the NFL level? I feel like the knock on him is the deep ball really hasn't been there. I don't know. What's your take on him as a passer?
Yes, I do. And I think if for those that were at the combine or even maybe watching on TV, I don't know how it looks on TV, but I was there like sitting around like the 20 or 30 yard line, watching go McCarthy and then Joe Milton and then Bo Nix. And so you had in between McCarthy and Nix, you had this rocket armed Uncle Rico in Joe Milton. You could just chuck it 75 yards in the air.
Right.
And so it was so funny because McCarthy doesn't have that rocket and Nix certainly doesn't have that rocket. And they were, accurately, connecting with wide receivers at the combine, like 45, 50, 53 air yards, whatever on their throws. And then Joe Milton would just let one rip for legitimately 75 yards. And you're just like, oh my gosh, which quarterback's the first round prospect? And obviously we've seen Milton play football. He's not that, but it was funny. Like there are clear with Nick's physical. I say all this, there were obviously physical differences and he didn't stand out, especially compared to other guys there that are not NFL, starters. So yes, there are probably some limitations to the upside with his game.
Do you like him as a processor, though? You said he got rid of the football very quickly. Do you think that's more the scheme, or does he bring that to a team?
So he was not at the quickest processor in his first 2 seasons at Auburn, but he clearly made impressive adjustments down the stretch in his career to just kind of know where the right read is. And so, yeah, I think pre and post snap work has gotten crazy good for him. And so I do think he's a pretty fast processor. But we don't have a large sample recently of him facing a bunch of pressure and having success there. So, yeah, there are questions, but I do think he's a plus value in that regard now.
Nice. Right, fantastic. So I think I know you're probably running into baby time. Let's talk about Penix for a couple of minutes. You talked a lot about Penix already, but let's talk about, pros and cons as a passer. Lately it's been said, oh, isn't he just like Pickett in terms of he had these elite NFL wide receivers and that's why he produced? Or it was DeBoer. I think you and I both respect him more than that for his game. But what are, the traits that make Penix interesting as an NFL quarterback?
He's, it's interesting just because, I don't know, you get he's got an interesting release. I don't know if I don't know if you've kind of always thought his release was a little interesting. It looks like he's winding up, but he's really not. Like if you see him kind of throw like close in person, he just has these ridiculously lanky arms. And so it does look longer than it is. And so if you're watching him he's left-handed. And so that's not something everyone's used to anyway. And it looks a little bit odd because his arms are so long. Like he has like 95th percentile arm length for quarterback prospects since 2000. And so that's why optically it looks different than your typical prospect. He's a lefty. He's got arms that are, like a basketball center, so that's different
too, right? Like 10-inch hands or something.
Yeah, like absolute just monster hands. He can just, throw the ball with his pinky finger alone. But so there's some weird things just down to that level of detail. But yeah, I think he's not super mobile, so he's not going to add a lot of value there. But he, like I said, he did flash at Indiana, and so he had brief windows where we were like, man, if you could just stay healthy, We said it 3 times in a row, and so I think there were more promising marks for him, even early career, than there was with Pickett. I think you watch Pitt football long enough to realize there was nothing special. There was no special trait when it came to Kenny Pickett. Even traits wise, there was nothing really special in his final season. So, and with him, he does not, Kenny Pickett, I mean, it's been a joke at this point, but he does not have those large mitts either. So just traits wise, the deep accuracy that Penix has, that also was not really there. He just had, Jordan Addison. But I think Penix, in terms of making the right decision, I talked to him at the NFL Combine too, because, he loved to talk up all of his other weapons and how good they were. But I talked to him about hey man, you have so many good weapons. How do you choose the right one on every play and avoid sacks like you do? And he talked up his weapons, and they're always open or whatever, but they're not always open. Sometimes he actually just throws them open, whether it be Jalen Polk or Jalen McMillan or Rome Odunze or one of his tight ends. He made Devin Culp look good, or Jack Westover, a former walk-on, look good at times. And so he can do really well. And even if he doesn't have perfect pieces around him, I think he could succeed in the right system. I guess he's not going to be a mobile guy ever, and that's okay.
Right.
I guess, but so maybe there's a little bit lower ceiling, but I'm not as concerned. If he just gets past the former injury thing, if the team gives him a shot, he could succeed. Because there's some wonky things in his profile, but also his peak passing production is still pretty juicy, really freaking good. Yeah. So this class, it's not going to have 6 hits, but it does have 6 profiles that make me believe there's hope for all of them.
Right. So my impression about Penix has been that teams are wary about the injury history. Does that track with actually having talked to front office guys?
Yes. Yes, it does. But I don't think it's as much as his strongest detractors would suggest. And even guys like I mentioned Telesco, I got a lot of good nuggets from him. He's a super process oriented guy. He's just he's a nerd. He's like one of us. And so he just loves talking process. And he values, I think, the experience that Nix and Penix bring. And so I think a team like the Raiders might not have any problem going with one of those guys in round 2. So I think the floor for both of those guys is round 2 at some point. Going into the Senior Bowl and even the NFL Combine, I thought there's some chance that either or both fell round 3. But now I don't think so. So I think that's going to make this class super interesting, having 6, top 60 quarterback picks, which we don't see that often.
Right. Yeah, the round 2 quarterback profile is you got to have the promising traits, but some red flag or whatever, right? Because otherwise you're just a day 3 pick, or they're taking you at 100 or something. All right, man, this has been awesome. So I think 2 things before we let you go. Who outside of the top 6 is interesting to you, and why? I guess both as an NFL talent evaluator, and then from a fantasy football perspective. I know my partner Kyle loves Pratt, the tools, the athleticism. People have been really gassing up Rattler recently. Is there someone else you think's interesting? Anyone you'd take if you were a team in the 6th round or in your 5th round of a dynasty draft?
Yeah. First, to address Rattler, I think for many people he's kind of like the consensus quarterback 7 for many people at this point. I think mine might actually be Jordan Travis still, and I'll get to him in a moment. But Rattler just went through a whole lot. He was on a reality television show at age 17. And I know that you can't even find that anymore because I think they took it down because it did not portray him very well. And the Netflix QB1 series, when he was still a 5-star recruit. But he clearly just developed both as a passer and both as kind of just a man. Clearly, it just when talking to him at the combine, you talk to him or even just hear him on interviews. I mean, if you didn't have access, you can hear he's a different player. He's a leader at this point. So that has changed in terms of his game. I think a lot of people still saw him as the punk kid they watched on some Netflix show for a few years, but that's just not the case. And his first year starting at Oklahoma was above the 90th percentile mark in several key areas. He wasn't the most mobile guy, still isn't, but I think he can quote unquote spin it, like a lot of guys can't, I think, that are coming out. So I wouldn't be surprised if you snuck into day 2, but I think he's more of an early day 3 prospect. because I mean he's not the 70-yard deep ball guy either. He just can really drop it in a bucket pretty accurately when he has time. He didn't have great weapons even in South Carolina. Juice Wells was down for all of last year, basically. Mm-hmm. And he ended up having to force feed targets to a fifth-year guy in Xavier Legette, who had never done a single thing in his entire career to that point. So I don't know. Just I want to root for him now just because I've seen him kind of develop and change as a person and really develop as a passer outside of just like some cheeky schematic stuff in his first season at Oklahoma. So I think he's probably at worst quarterback 8. But I think why quarterback 7 is Jordan Travis for me is because actually I think I don't even remember which year it is now. Maybe it was 2020 or so, maybe 2021. He was in a college for a long time, but even like the year before he broke out, before he was like a national name, I guess even that season in terms of the scheme adjusted pass efficiency metric that I use to kind of benchmark quarterback production, he was in the 80s in terms of like his percentile, which I was like double checked and had to like do the math. I was like, really? What? Jordan Travis? But he was. And then the past 2 seasons, really, especially last year, he was immensely efficient as both a passer and a runner. And it was really just a terrible shame that he got injured because Florida State would have gone to the playoff had he stayed healthy.
Maybe the title game.
Yeah. Huge chance for that to happen. So I don't know. It's just I think that what he was, I don't think people understand how good he was as a passer even before last season, by like an adjusted metric standpoint. And so I think that he's just going to be that undervalued guy. I don't know how late he goes because of the injury, but if it weren't for the injury, he was going to be a fringe day 2 prospect for me. So I think there's a clear top 2 for me after the top 6 even. And Pratt, you mentioned him. I know that he's been kind of an interesting name, and he's like discount, JJ McCarthy, G5 discount JJ McCarthy profile because he's got that low sample size, passing volume numbers with some underrated mobility. But he's a day 3 guy. That's probably it at this point. And kind of a career backup that sticks around the league for a while and makes more money than he probably should, but good news for him. So
right. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, Travis is actually ahead of Penix in my model. I think because of rushing. But I mean, other metrics have to be good for him to get there. He did have like a 30% pressure to sack ratio, which is that's very bad. But
and that's
there's some context.
Exactly, and that's why he's not in the bucket of guys that I would say could be potential successful starters. But if he continues to improve and change in that regard specifically, maybe. But interesting for sure.
Yeah, backup that can come in and carry a team for a few games if needed. Interesting. All right, cool. So I get just a quick call to action. If you guys like this content, make sure you're following Travis. Make sure you're following me. Make sure you check out Travis's podcast and definitely give us a like, give us a subscribe, review the show. We need your support. We need all that type stuff to keep going and growing the brand. And then I guess like my final question for you, and this has been phenomenal. You are a fount of wisdom. That is awesome, man. I love bringing your practical experience, with the NFL media, the combine, and front offices. That's phenomenal. And you are truly a nerd at heart, which I appreciate.
Absolute nerd. Proud of it.
I am right there, man. Any early thoughts on 2025, 2026? I know a lot of people are a little bit down in the 2025 class, and yet I've heard from NFL type people that fantasy people are down in the class. NFL type people might not be. What's your early impression? And I know a lot of guys could take a jump, but just where we're at right now, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, because there are a lot of people that need clicks to happen and need attention and hype to happen that, have jobs and like mine, maybe, they're going to talk up quarterbacks for the next year that could be first round picks. But the truth is we don't have any returning profile that screams, hey, I should be a first overall pick. There's just not one like anywhere. Quinn Ewers, when healthy, the best version of him could be that. And I think he might be the sexy name this summer to be that kind of first round pick, especially because of the team that surrounds him in Sark's system. And if he has his best season ever with the traits and the pedigree, that he'll probably be in the mix to be an early first-round pick. Carson Beck, because he plays for Georgia, had a phenomenal season last year, and from an efficiency standpoint, especially down the stretch when he just synced up with Brock Bowers and they kind of carried the team at times. But with him, I do have kind of like that upside and like mobility plus value projection for him too, because I don't think he's that kind of like elite level athlete at all, and I don't think many people do either. So quarterback wise, we're missing that top tier profile. Shedeur Sanders, speaking of like sack issues, he was like the worst in all of football for a couple of different stints last year. And so people want to, point to the offensive line issues there for him. They weren't like a bottom 25 or 30 offensive line by most meaningful metrics in front of him. He just made a lot of freaking terrible decisions. And so he has to clean that up in a big way. And it was his fault, frankly, that they were as bad as they were in many ways. He kind of like, had a couple like stat padding moments in comeback spots because they were already down by $1 billion at the USC game specifically. People like look back on that game as like a good one. They were up by like a bajillion points and took the pedal off the gas, or the foot off the gas there. And they almost kind of made this weird comeback because USC's defense is trash. But Shedeur is just going to get pumped up because he's Deion's kid, and that's it. And there's nothing we can do about it, because anybody that writes a Shedeur piece knows that it's going to get 25,000 clicks minimum. And so like that's just going to happen. But other profiles that could get there, if you squint, Jackson Dart could be the like low key low key post hype sleeper rather, because he had all that hype coming out of USC, goes to Ole Miss, throws too many picks, and I guess it was 2022, but has a pretty decent season last year with great weapons, and now they bring even more weapons around him in Kiffin's system. If he has that kind of peak, come out of nowhere Heisman effort, and there's a good chance he does, given the surroundings that he has and the schedule and everything. Ole Miss is going to have a very good year this year. He could be that guy and be a first-round profile. Jalen Milroe could lose his starting job, or he could be a first-round pick. Like he's because his tools are just ridiculous. He looks like a freaking alien. He's just an unreal athlete. And when they started to use him last year, Alabama that is, as a real mobile threat, he had like 500 plus rushing yards, and I don't know, down the back half of the year for the most part. So if he really cleans things up and finds more consistency in the intermediate and doesn't take sacks every like 5 plays, he could get there. But it's just like we're squinting in every case, like and kind of forcing it in almost every case. So I think NFL realizes it's not there. 2026 is our next hope. Drew Aller, maybe Connor Weigman, but I think both of those guys could stay and be a part of 2026, given the state of NIL, and they need more than one prove it season probably to go early as well.
That was going to be my question. I'm still holding on to Weigman and Aller backs. My model loves Aller. 12-1 career touchdown interception ratio right now, but you just need to see him like do something to get us excited on the field.
Lots of another putt offense that just does not give him opportunities to really showcase his talents. And they didn't really have any wide receivers last year they brought in Trey Wallace that was supposed to be that guy who wasn't.
It was
Keandre Lambert-Smith
that came up.
Dante Cevis. No. So Julian Fleming is now transferring there from Ohio State. Maybe that's it. I don't know. So we'll see if they actually give him a chance to profile like a first-round quarterback, because the tools seem to be there. Weigman, Texas A&M did their darndest to ruin him real quick. He's another guy with like crazy high efficiency and small samples. He's one that could like come out of nowhere to be like an early first-round pick too. But
Stewart going away isn't going to help.
To what?
Evan Stewart going away is not going to help his case.
No, it's not. But there's a bunch of guys that we just hope take that next level step. Right. But I'm more excited about the Nico Iamaleavas, the Tennessee quarterback, the Jackson Arnold, the new quarterback for Oklahoma. could you imagine being, the head coach of Oklahoma, Venables, and just being like, I know we have like the most experienced college quarterback ever in Dylan Gabriel. Maybe like if he just stays healthy for this year for Oregon, he transferred there. For those unfamiliar, he's gonna break Bo Nix's start records in passing yard. Like he'll have the passing yards, passing touchdowns, and starts records if he just like stays healthy and they make the playoff. So they're like, yeah, this guy, most experienced guy ever, fifth most efficient passer in the country. We don't need you. Leave. We want Jackson Arnold. Like that's crazy.
I'm very excited about Arnold.
Yeah.
He looked really good, and he's got some good weapons around him.
Yeah.
I think he's going to be the guy there. But I'm with you. I am Maleva looks great too. Got the kid at South Carolina who maybe isn't starting. Looked good. Limited samples.
Lenore Sellers. Yeah.
Yeah, and then. So what did you think about the USC kid transferring to Boise State, Malachi
Nelson? So Boise is in a really fun spot because they've got a great running game. They have a better defense than they probably have. For Mountain West, purposes, they're fine. And so if they have this high pedigree guy that comes in is just should be better than all the players around him.
Right.
And that works out, like Boise State might make the playoff this year. They might be the G5 team that makes the playoff because of the success of one Malachi Nelson. So there's a bunch of guys that could eventually hit. And Dante Moore transferred to Oregon. He's not going to play this year, but
very
if he figures things out, so 2026 could be a really intriguing quarterback class. Is what I'm saying. We're probably going to have a down year next year.
I think so.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for confirming my bias. I love it, Travis.
That's what I'm here for. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, you're the man. Oh, look, I said I can't be effusive enough in my praise. This has been phenomenal. I really appreciate you taking time away from your family to come. Anything else you want to plug on the back end here? Tell the people where to find your work this year.
Oh man, check out A2ZSports.com for real. Like it's just, everything from. So we have this amazing Patriots beat writer, but she also does a bunch of great Taylor Swift coverage. Like, and it's hilarious. Like she is a great writer. So like we have everything from the latest Taylor Swift coverage. If you're tired of that, sorry, but like we have that. But then you have like really in-depth breakdowns with like 3-round mock drafts, not only for like this year but for next year, and really thoughtful pieces, like the full spectrum of unique sports angles, I feel like. And so I'm just really proud to be a part of the team there. And so I'm learning a lot from them there. Like there's just like, I don't know, like the guy who has been all over Ohio State, but also covers the Browns, like his expertise in terms of like understanding the coaching staff there. Like it's just, it's wild. The knowledge base of our staff and the experience. So I'm just really kind of humbled to be a part of that team and just lead the college team as we build that out this fall. So I think there's going to be a lot of really good college football coverage. So check out A to Z Sports. Try to cover every single NFL city, having their own kind of landing page there. And we're going to have that here soon for all the top college brands as soon as this summer. So yeah, that's what I'm most excited about. I just started there to really start this year ahead of the Senior Bowl. So it's still brand new, but it's been wild. That the Senior Bowl, combine, free agency, it's insane. But having all of those things kind of covered in one spot from every angle, just really confident in the team. So that's my plug more than anything, just because I'm excited. But the College2Canton show with Stefan Leco is a blast. We're actually going to be kind of like, I think, kind of rebranding that here soon, changing things in the near future, but definitely can check that out as well. Really pumped to be in like year 4 or 5, I don't know, with Stefan doing that show. So A to Z Sports, College2Canton podcast. I guess you can find me on the X thing at FF_Travis M. But yeah, thank you, man. Appreciate you having me on. This was a blast.
Yeah, no, we appreciate you, man. Hope to get you back soon for some more if we can squeeze you in, or you can squeeze us into your family schedule. And from the Devy Dose, I'm EK. We appreciate you all out there. Happy Saturday.